Now for today's program. Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former State Department Middle East analyst and negotiator in Republican and Democratic administrations. He is the author most recently of The End of Greatness: Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President. Aaron is a frequent commentator on CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and BBC, and his articles have appeared in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Foreign Policy, and Foreign Affairs. Aaron is an advisory board member to Moment's own Moment Institute Middle East Fellows Program. Joining Aaron today is Robert Siegel. Robert was the senior host of NPR's award-winning evening news magazine, All Things Considered, for 30 years. He was awarded the Edward Murrow Lifetime Achievement Award in Journalism and has been honored with 3 silver batons from Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University, as well as the American Bar Association's Silver Gavel Award. Currently, he hosts Navigating the New Abnormal, a series of web seminars sponsored by American Friends of Rabin Medical Center on the JBS Jewish Broadcasting Service television network. Robert is a special contributor to Moment Magazine and serves on the advisory board for Moment's Daniel Pearl Investigative Journalism Initiative. Please welcome Aaron David Miller and Robert Siegel.
Thank you, Suzanne, and Aaron, it's good to see you again. I want to apologize in advance for what will be obvious by now, which is that I'm suffering from a bad cold and some laryngitis, and I hope that I can maintain or have as few coughing eruptions as possible over the next few minutes. Aaron, many people submitted questions with their signing in, with their registration, and I'm going to put their questions to you in just a moment. But first, I'd just like to get from you. It's been 3 weeks since we spoke last. If you were to sum up where we stand right now in the Israel-Gaza war, what would you say?
Yeah, first of all, let me thank Suzanne and Moment under Nadine's leadership. And Robert, even though you may have a cold, that voice still comes through. I miss it on a weekly, more than weekly basis. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but 3 weeks in, 24 days in, confusion and opacity reigns. You can take each of the components of the Israeli war against Hamas, and I think what we don't know exceeds what we do. First, on the issue of hostages. The breaking news today that the Israelis discovered, regained possession of, an abductee, as they call them, hostages, a woman soldier from the Holos who was apparently taken on October 7th. Under what circumstances she was released, whether they identified a Hamas cell, whether she was in the company of a smaller number of Hamas fighters, unclear. The negotiations hosted by the Qataris, who obviously, one of the great ironies of this crisis, have played host and financial backer of Hamas for many years now, remains completely opaque. We have no idea whether or not there are serious negotiations on trade. The humanitarian situation, which frankly is about the clearest thing I can say about this crisis, other than the brutality and savagery that is now in film and in the stories, that those Israelis who encountered Hamas on that fateful 24 hours in the 20-plus communities in what they call the Gaza envelope proximate to Gaza. The humanitarian situation is dire, both at Rafah, where insufficient amounts of food, medicine, and water, let alone fuel, are not getting through. The humanitarian situation in Gaza City, in the face of Israeli airstrikes in order to target Hamas positions, is probably approaching catastrophic levels. There are no bakeries, hospitals are semi-functioning. The absence of food self-service now has been restored. Where that's going, how are the Israelis going to continue to navigate the cruel dilemma of striking Hamas positions without killing and injuring Palestinian civilians? Unclear. The ground campaign, about which the Israelis are incredibly circumspect, not sharing much information. And as you've seen on your TV sets, no matter what the channel, I'm more familiar with CNN and MSNBC. Correspondents are forced to rely on reports, if they can get them, from individuals or their stringers in Gaza. But we really have very little idea about the extent and the granular of the last 4 days of Israeli ground campaign. Situation in the north, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said yesterday, I guess it was yesterday, that there's serious prospects of escalation. When a national security advisor says that, you know he's not musing or speculating. They obviously have information and chatter that maybe Hezbollah's calculations and Iran's may be changing. But we really don't know where that's going as well. I stand incredibly humble and exercising real discretion, trying to, in most of my commentary, because speculation about where we are now and where this is heading, let alone the day after, Robert, which I know you want to talk about, filled with so many complexities and uncertainties. I'll stop here.
Okay, let me put some of the questions now that have been submitted by members of the audience. One question is, what led Israel to commence its ground assault against Hamas during a brief period when hostage discussions appeared to be potentially promising?
I think that's the paradox of the current situation. In fact, the Israelis have essentially admitted this off the record, or at least not for attribution. They argue that it was their frustration with those negotiations, which were not producing results, that clearly signaled to them that Hamas was, no surprise here, manipulating the hostage situation to their own advantage. Rumors that an all-for-all trade was in the works, that is to say, release all of the hostages, and not creating a selection process which separated foreign nationals from Israelis and Jews, reminiscent of the Holocaust, seemed to be real, but again, didn't produce anything. And I think the Israelis calculated, whether they're accurate or not is unclear. They've already claimed credit and argued that their operational margin in Gaza, the fact that they're there, has led to the release of this one hostage. I think the Israelis decided that the only way to accelerate these negotiations was to up the pressure on Hamas. We'll see in the days ahead whether or not that calculation was correct or not.
Here's a question, and I should say here, it's about aid getting into Gaza, and there was some more aid that got in today. But the question is, if the difficulty getting into aid is with the Egyptian gate, why don't the Israelis allow aid to go in from Israel?
I think, on this one, I'm not speculating. I think if you had to divide up the responsibility of why aid is not surging, why the trickle, and today more trucks got in than any time in the past, and apparently the Americans have a commitment from the Israelis to admit 100 trucks. I think the aid question through Rafah is a consequence of real risk aversion on the part of the Israelis to pressure, seemingly depriving Palestinian civilians of food, medicine, let alone fuel, which is critically important and which they are not prepared to admit because of their concern that Hamas is going to divert it. Whether there's a way around that, I don't know. Fuel is so critical for powering water desal, critical for hospital generators, and obviously critical for the distribution of aid. Without cooking gas, without gas, how do you distribute aid to the people who need it? But I think they clearly have made a decision since they instituted the blockade that they wanted to keep the pressure on. Hamas is being extremely withholding with respect to who comes out of Gaza. I'm not sure they're interested in opening the gates and allowing thousands of Palestinians out. The Egyptians, on the other hand, are simply incredibly risk averse about anyone moving from Gaza through Rafah into Egypt proper. We have 400 to 600 Americans, the number is uncertain, who have essentially become hostages. And the administration's view is that Hamas is simply not processing them and refuses to let them go. These are family members who were visiting, or NGO and aid workers, mostly dual nationals. I suspect in coming days I could offer an opinion. This is not based on fact, that as supportive as the Biden administration has been with respect to Israel, and it really is extraordinary how supportive they have been, sort of no daylight, at least publicly, approach. Two issues are beginning to create some measure of friction. One is the humanitarian issue, and the administration is pressing the Israelis every day to allow more aid in. The other issue is the deaths and injury and displacement of Palestinian civilians. Mm-hmm. And here the administration is navigating an impossible line, it seems to me, pushing the Israelis to adhere to international humanitarian law, with the Israelis operating in densely populated areas in which targets are co-located with Palestinian civilians. I don't know what the answer to this is, but the humanitarian question and the deaths of Palestinian civilians, in my view, just detached from all of this, putting my personal views aside, has already begun to erode the international legitimacy and support that Israel initially enjoyed for this operation.
Here's a question. One of our audience members asks, how can what Israel is doing to the people of Gaza be anything other than a war crime? You mentioned conforming to international law. Are the Israelis, to the extent that we know, generally staying within the limits of international law?
Well, I mean, obviously, you'll get 3 or 4 different opinions on this. I'm not an international lawyer. I'm not going to pronounce war crimes. Getting to the question of whether what Hamas did on October 7 in the first 24 hours was a war crime or not. I just think the problem is impossible. Even if the Israelis are prepared to give advance warning, and they've dropped leaflets trying to persuade Palestinians who are in Gaza City to move south. They've requested that Quds Hospital find a way to relocate. Seems completely out of the question. So this is a problem, in my judgment, without a solution. You're certainly not going to get the Biden administration to pronounce on whether or not this is a war crime. In fact, I suspect if asked the question, they would basically say that we've pressed the Israelis to adhere to international humanitarian law. They're trying their best. We're supporting them, and maybe in addition, the United States should send its own ordnance experts and individuals who have a good deal of experience. They sent a 3-star already, a guy who had intimate experience with counterinsurgency in Mosul. That may or may not be having an effect. Yeah. The Israeli Minister of Defense, Gallant, the other day in the press conference said, and I quote, "We will listen to our friends, but we will do what is right for us." And I think, have they expanded their rules of engagement, which makes civilian deaths and injuries more likely? I don't know.
Yeah. Here's a question. Is it really possible to eliminate Hamas or sympathy for Hamas as more and more people, especially children in Gaza, are killed? Doesn't it just elevate Hamas or the goals of Hamas in the eyes of Palestinians?
I think at the end, however this ends, you're going to end up with 2 traumatized communities. When we talk about eliminating Hamas, let's be clear what we mean. There are at least 3 different layers. There's Hamas, the military organization, with its high trajectory weapons, its command and control, its ammunition dumps, its rocket manufacturing facilities, its tunnel structure. There's Hamas, the governance an administrative dimension. And remember, Hamas has been in Gaza since the early 80s. It's an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Dawah, the so-called calling, in which Hamas has reached out to scores of thousands of Palestinians and Gazans through schools, through educational facilities, through the mosque, to imbue them with Hamas ideology. And then the third dimension is Hamas as an idea. Hamas is the embodiment of an organization, and it's the organizational embodiment of an idea. I asked a Palestinian in the 80s why there was so much support among Palestinians for Arafat. The answer was striking. And I used it actually as an explanation as to why certain Americans support any number of American politicians. And the answer was, we support Arafat because Arafat is a stone that we throw at the Israelis every day. Arafat is a stone that we throw at the Israelis every day. So there is a dimension of that. So can the Israelis destroy Hamas as a military organization? Probably. Can they erode and undermine its sovereignty in Gaza? That is to say, its very capacity to govern and to provide administrative services, water, electricity, everything that it takes to run a tiny statelet, however imperfectly and badly governed it is. Mm-hmm. Maybe. But all of this depends. You want a Gaza without Hamas, then you need to deal with the underlying support structure as to why Hamas has been able to rule Gaza from 2007, when it launched its coup against Fatah, until now. You need to address Palestinians' security, give them some sense of the prospects of prosperity, and above all, and this is where it gets even more complex, you will not be able to separate the day after in Gaza and building some post-Hamas or post-conflict reality in Gaza. You will not be able to untether that from the broader problem of solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yes.
Because if you want Palestinian Authority participation, or any participation of any Palestinians in the wake of the wreckage and disaster that we've witnessed, and more is coming, you're going to have to address that dimension as well. And thereby you have an gargantuan galactic task in front of the who or what is going to take this on when this ends, and it will end. It will end.
I just a follow-up question from me. There's an Israeli narrative that you hear very often now that the people of Gaza are the hostages of Hamas, and indeed, when they elected Hamas, it was the only election they've had, and when a rather corrupt Palestinian Authority was not doing a great job of governing Gaza. I haven't been there since 2005. I mean, I know firsthand kind of this, but do you think that the Palestinian population of Gaza is broadly anti-Hamas, or I mean, is there anything to that?
I mean, how do you answer a question like that? I would direct you, if I could figure out how to put an article in the chat room, I'll send it to Zan afterwards, and to you, Robert. There's an article up in Foreign Affairs website. Fascinating article, which purports to be the results of polling by the Arab Barometer, which is a very credible polling organization. The polling was done between late September and October 6. What they found was quite striking. What they found was a degree of disenchantment and opposition, both on the question of Hamas's capacity to deliver economic vitality to Gaza. And they found that of the several outcomes they proposed for resolution of the Palestinian problem, the one that seemed to be most popular, I don't know whether it got a plurality or not, was a two-state solution. And they even did a poll as to who the 790 respondents that were asked, who would you vote for in a presidential election to run the Palestinian Authority? Hamas or Fatah or independent? The guy who got the most votes was Marwan Barghouti, who was serving 5 lifetime sentences in an Israeli jail, who I could see under some circumstances, maybe tethered to a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah.
Since he has tremendous support from Fatah, he has credibility with the Islamists, and he is very well known to the Israelis. Releasing Barghouti as part of a new leadership, because you will need a new leadership. So it was, I think, 30+% for Barghouti, 20-some% for Ismail Haniyeh, who's
Hamas.
the political, right? Hamas. And I think 12 or 15%, of course, for the forlorn Mahmoud Abbas, who is in the 18th year of a 4-year term.
Yeah.
So if that poll is even remotely accurate, at least it suggests that there's a clear, there are clear differences.
Yeah.
I'll send it. You might want to take a look. I think it's
Yes,
quite interesting.
I'm interested in that. We have a couple of questions from registrants about Qatar, which I find fascinating, and I'll put them both to you. Will Qatar be under pressure to preclude Hamas political leaders remaining there? And this is referring to a Boston Globe op-ed article, is a Qatari-led condominium ruling Gaza for up to 10 years or anything like that a viable post-war avenue to a more lasting peace?
I'm not sure I understood the first question.
The first question is, will Qatar now be under pressure to oust Hamas political leaders who are based there?
Right. So you got this, I don't know I don't know even how I would describe it. It's head exploding. You have the Qataris as probably the single most influential mediators in an effort to release hostages. And at the same time, they host the external leadership. At the same time, because it's a tiny little place with a lot of gas, seemingly willing to stand up to the Saudis with Jazeera, it also courts and has supported Islamists over the years, and some with pretty nasty pedigrees. So if you're an American administration, or forget that, you're the government of Israel, and you want your hostages back, the Turks are a possibility. The Egyptians certainly can play a role. They have in the past. But Qatar seems to be the key mediator. So what do you do? I mean, in the wake of this, it is almost inconceivable to me that the external leadership of this organization will be publicly based somewhere. If they are, I think it's only a matter of time. Just as the Israelis did in the wake of the Munich massacres in '72, that there'll be a list.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a problem for Qatar. Remember, we have a critically important military base in Qatar. So again, it's one of these, not black and white, sort of Byzantine Middle East problems. And it's going to remain contradictory with a lot of ambiguity, certainly through the rest of this crisis.
Yeah.
As far as Qatar coming back, no, the Qataris are not going to, basically take responsibility for ruling Gaza. They don't want to do it. They couldn't do it. You're going to have an interesting mix. And again, a lot of it depends how this ends. How is this going to end?
Yeah.
In terms of the kinetic piece of this is what I mean, the military piece. Hamas fired rockets, I understand today, toward Jerusalem. We're 3 weeks into this crisis. They've again demonstrated they have high trajectory weapons with range. I don't think there have been since 2021 rockets fired in that direction. They're demonstrating a degree of resilience, which is going to continue to confound, I think, the Israelis. And if, in fact, they're dribbling out hostages in an effort to buy time, play on divisions within the hostage families and the government of Israel, accelerate the terrible humanitarian conditions in Gaza, start to create pressure on the Israelis for a humanitarian truce or a ceasefire. It's conceivable this could drag on.
Yeah.
For weeks. Now,
on the Qatari question, I would just add, I love these numbers that Qatar is a country with a population of a bit over 3 million, and only 15% of that population are native Qataris. The rest are mostly from South Asia and the Philippines. Everyone is a foreign worker, essentially. 85% of the population. And while they have a ton of cash from natural gas, what they lack is Qataris to do anything. And they seem to have decided that their best strategy to remain independent is to be vital to people, and they're this open space where people can negotiate. Here's a question. I want to hear what you think of the premise of the question. The question is, what can be done about the one-sided news coverage? Whenever civilians are killed by Israeli airstrikes, it is because Hamas stores weapons near mosques, hospitals, schools, and residential buildings. Mainstream media never reports this. Have you been dissatisfied with the coverage?
So wait, just so I understand the import of the question, that
what can be done about it is the question, I guess.
No, but the question suggests or doesn't suggest. It basically states that the coverage is one-sided. That in fact the Israelis are given.
It says that yes, that the reason that the Israelis Israeli airstrikes claim civilian lives is because Hamas stores weapons near mosques, hospitals, schools, and residential buildings. Mainstream media never reports this.
Right. Well, I think mainstream media. I mean, I'm doing a lot with at least 2 of the 3 cable networks, and I'll give you my impressions. You can't go 5 minutes turning on either CNN or MSNBC without hearing about the savagery and brutality of what happened on October 7th. I find the coverage, frankly, to be the frame that is created, and it's reflected in the administration's position, in the president's mind. It's a very pro-Israeli frame, which is sequenced. We wouldn't be having this conversation. Yeah, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict did not begin on October 7th. I get that. But what happened on October 7th went so far beyond anything Israelis and Palestinians have experienced through 2 intifadas, maybe the suicide attacks during the second intifada in 2002. That this goes beyond that. So I think the coverage, frankly, as I see it, has been very, very pro-Israel. And the networks, like the administration's position, has begun to evolve slowly and gradually in the face of the frightful death toll and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. I don't think I can't speak for the entire American media. I'll just think I'll speak for the administration. I shouldn't even be doing that, but I think what the world demands, what the region demands, what the Arabs demand, what and I hate to characterize, American politics as left, right, or center, but what many, many in this country demand is moral consistency. Not just moral clarity, about what happened on October 7th. They want moral consistency. That is to say, what the Israelis are doing in Gaza is just as bad as what happened on October 7th. They want that kind of moral consistency. I mean, I have thoughts on why that is, certainly in terms of our domestic politics. But again, and maybe I'm too inured to this. It could, it could very well be the case. I mean, I'm a member of the American Jewish community, but my identity has been shaped for decades by my primary identity, which is as an American, and then add on to what I've tried to do with respect to Arab-Israeli peacemaking. So again, I think that the coverage has been very pro-Israel.
As we're we just have a few minutes left. So here's a big picture question. A registrant asks, I have heard and read conflicting reports as to whether a one-state or a two-state arrangement or neither is a possible end result and goal. Any further or updated thoughts on that?
I'll give you the same message that I've been trying to get people to listen to ever since I left government in 2003. The least worst solution to ending this conflict is separation through negotiations. There is no other approach, in my judgment, that answers the mail on the psychological, territorial, political, religious drivers of this conflict. There is no precedent in the Middle East or internationally that I can identify of two national groups competing over territory and overlapping religious space with a history of trauma and brutality and violence inflicted on one upon the other that is ever going to live, I know ever is a long time, under one house happily ever after. Cyprus, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria. I mean, we have constructed a big tent in this country. And despite all the imperfections of our of this republic and all the violence, it still is striking and stunning to me how we have managed to accommodate so many different strands and strains and groups of humans with fundamentally different points of view without a complete and utter societal breakdown. I can't imagine Israelis and Palestinians living happily ever after in a one-state reality, which exists now, or in a one-state solution. And I will just add one point to this, because I keep repeating this, and I know it's annoyingly negative. You want to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then you need four things. You give me two of these things, and I'll give you a fighting chance to succeed. Number one, leaders who are masters of their political houses, not prisoners of their ideologies and their own politics. We do not have such a leader or leaders on either side of this line. Number two, a sense of ownership among Israelis and Palestinians, that to which they care more about solving this than any external party. You've heard the old expression, in the history of the world, nobody ever washed a rental car. People don't wash rental cars because they care only about what they own. And there's insufficient ownership. Number three, effective U.S. mediation. The last time we were effective mediators, and I voted for Republicans and Democrats, and I worked for Republicans and Democrats, was the Bush 41 James Baker administration. That was a 4-year run. My own view on the U.S. piece of this, had Rabin not been murdered, and had George H.W. Bush gotten 4 more years, it has been my contention all along that between Rabin, Baker, and Bush, we would have had one agreement, either between Israel and Syria, or Israel and the Palestinians. And Robert, the two of us would be having a very different conversation around it. And finally, you need an agreement with the Arab parties in tow on what the end state is. What's the point of these negotiations? And I contend to you, even though people I respect greatly believe the two-state solution has gone the way of the dodo, I defy anybody to come up with anything that even remotely resembles a feasible, practical alternative. And I'm sorry to drone on, but this is a critical point.
I agree with nearly everything you say.
We're saying one other thing.
Yes.
The president the other day said, we cannot return to the status quo. I'm not sure whether he was aware of what he was implying. I'll tell you what that means to me.
Yeah.
That means forget Gaza as an open air prison anymore. This crisis has generated enough pain and horrors, and we're not even a third of the way through it, that Gaza, the future of Gaza needs to change from an open air prison to something else. And number two, I don't know if he meant it or whether he understands the implications of what he said. You have to tether that Gaza solution to a comprehensive Israeli-Palestinian peace. And who's going to put their arms around this come January 2024 when the crisis is over? Maybe. Well, I got one candidate that seems to have put themselves in the position, having tethered themselves so closely to the Israelis. It's the U.S. And think about the implications of that in an election year. Anyway, sorry, I apologize again.
No. The only point on which I take issue with you, which I do this all the time, is the observation that nobody ever washed a rental car. Was made just at the moment that the leasing of high-end cars became extremely common in the United States. And
I use this line all the time.
Yeah.
Invariably, a couple of weeks later, I get a note in the mail, usually from a wife, a sister, or a girlfriend, and I'm just reporting. Don't shoot me. With a receipt from a car. My wife Lindsay is sick of this line anyway, but I think it's a really important line.
Well, we have a couple of minutes, just a couple of minutes. I'll ask you one more question, which is, if in fact the United States position is that this cannot revert to the status quo, and if in fact we're talking about a new degree of self-governance in the Palestinian areas, has the degree of settlement activity on the West Bank left something that can be plausibly sold to the Palestinians as a part of an independent country, albeit one with plenty of holes in it, or in fact has the settlement movement won out and precluded an independent Palestinian state there?
I mean, basically, that's a proposition worth testing. Some argue that it's 5 past midnight, that game's over, closed for this season. I just refuse to accept that. Doesn't make any sense to me. I'm going to say never. I have two 40-year-old kids. I'm going to tell them never. By what right do I, who occupy a tiny space on the planet for a very short period of time, have the right to say never? I don't. It's morally and ethically unconscionable. That doesn't mean I have to be Panglossian and whistle past the graveyard on this stuff. I know how hard it's going to be. But you give me leadership and you give me ownership and an effective U.S. mediator that's prepared to apply honey and ample amounts of it and a lot of vinegar at the right time to both parties. And who knows? But it's better than saying never, Robert.
Aaron David Miller.
What would the rabbis say? I mean, what would the rabbis say, right? I mean, it's over to, the world's imperfect, therefore you basically give up and you say never, right? Never going to happen. Go home.
They would say, choose diplomacy, Truce. Aaron David Miller, it's great to talk with you once again. And thanks to all of you out there who submitted questions with your registration. They're good questions. Suzanne?
Yes. Yes. Thank you both, Aaron and Robert. You've given us a lot to think about, and it's a lot to digest. I want to remind everybody to go to our website at momentmag.com to sign up for our program, which is this Thursday with Israeli-born comedian Modi. We'll be talking about laughter in a time of mourning. Aaron, I wanted to let you know, I put the article in the chat, what Palestinians really think of Hamas, from Foreign Affairs magazine. I will be sending up a follow-up email that will include a link to this program, and I will also include the link that's in the chat to the article.
Suzanne, can I do a public service announcement?
Please.
I forgot. I'm interviewing Khalil Shikaki, who from on Thursday is the most reliable and preeminent Palestinian pollster. I'm going to send you an invitation for that. If you could, as appropriate, of course, if you could circulate that. I think people will be fascinated by the conversation.
We'll put that in the email as well.
Great.
Again, Aaron and Robert, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Great.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.